let's take a look at this writing sample. This student's probably an intermediate grade student. So it's in a 4th or 5th grade level. But this is their writing. So this is probably, what would you imagine, a 1st grade level?
That looks a lot like my 7th and 8th graders.
That's right. That's right. That's what I was going to say. We think this might be a lower level writing sample, but we have middle school students and 9th grade, 10th grade students who write like this when they have to do that independently. But if you were going to look at this, this writing sample, what might you think would be their error? If you were analyzing this writing sample, what might you find is the error in this? Or what do you think this kid might need to work on?
There's capitalization, punctuation.
Right. So conventions is legibility and spacing. If you were going to quantify this, first the thing you would look at is how many words is in that sentence? 15. So you could count the total number of words, and then you could either count spelling errors, words spelled correctly, correct word sequence, punctuation. How many words are spelled correctly? 12. So then you could quantify that. So 12, so given a 1-minute writing prompt, Reese was able to correctly spell 12 out of 15 words. So if you quantify that, that's going to give you a percentage. You can also count with punctuation, because again, you use this 1-minute writing probe. So there's lots as a piece of information that you could collect from this writing sample. Okay, so when we're talking through this, using this writing sample to think about what we were measuring, so this might help us be more able to identify what it is we're looking for and then how we're going to quantify that. But let's look at that first one for fluency. So we talked about what that would look like if the total number of words written. That was again where we said that 15. So we can look at a writing sample from one of those written expression probes and then decide based on that student's work how many total words were written. So if we were looking at that over time and progress monitoring, we could look at the number of words written each time that they were presented with a 1-minute writing probe. And then we could see whether that student was making growth or not. We talked about legibility and that correct letter formation. So if that's something we were going to look at, are all of those letters correct? And for the most part, those letters are correct, I think.
The only one I would question would be that last word on the top row. What is that word? I can't tell what that word is. She something.
She have. I believe that's supposed to be like have, H-A-B-E, have.
So if that's a B, then that's a poorly written B. So that would be the only one I would notice.
Yeah. So if we were looking at that, we would look at the number of correct letters. So we could even count the correct, the total number of letters, and then how many letters were written correctly. Would you say that this student can demonstrate mastery of upper and lowercase letters? Maybe not, right? Because when you look at this, we don't see the appropriate use of upper or lowercase letters. So we could look at conventions for this student, because we see punctuation errors, we see spelling errors, we see capitalization errors, and are they following the appropriate grammar rules? So let's say we're going to look at conventions and we wanted to take this writing sample. We could look at words spelled correctly. So we talked about that a minute ago, and if we calculated that, we said what he had 12 out of 15. So we could actually we could compute that. And that would give us 80%. So that would tell us that he got 80% of those words correctly. But now let's look at the correct writing sequence. And let's see, are all of his or her words in this prompt written in the correct sequence? Not really. Was a doll, and she knows that it was. She has a toy, and she gave.
It's like they ran out of time and didn't finish.
Yep, run out of time. So that's an issue. That'd probably be a fluency issue. Was a doll and she knows that it was. That's probably not correct, is it? Let's try to see how many we think might be the correct words. On the sample we have, I see that there is 7, on our example, that there is 7 words written correctly in the sequence. Take that was a out and it would be doll, and she knows that it was. But you could look at that and you would say, what's the correct word, the writing sequence? Does their sentence make sense? Is it coherent? Does it flow? And if it's not, then you could write that. You would probably have to take off, the ones that were not correct and only count the correct ones. So if you did that and you counted that there were 7 correct in the writing sequence out of 15 total words, that would be a 47% correct word sequence. That's what is so important for us when we think about those IEP goals and being able to progress monitor what we're saying that we're working on. So this student might be fluency, it could be legibility, it could be conventions. If you were looking at this chart that's on the screen, what do you think their biggest problem might be? So you may start with organization and then maybe conventions. That would give you a starting point. So you would be able to take that writing sample and kind of know at least some place to start. You may have to give another prompt or a probe for them to be able to really narrow that down, but this will really give you that guidance about where do you start. If I know what the problem is, then I know some SDI that I can use around that instruction. So here is another example, and this one came from Reading Rockets. If you were going to quantify that, how many words are correct in that on this piece?
24.
Mm-hmm. So on this screen now, we're looking at this writing sample, and then we're going to try to think about what would we identify as the problem.
The thing that stood out to me was the spelling and the conventions.
Mm-hmm. We know conventions, so conventions is going to be an issue for that. Vocabulary could possibly be.
Mm-hmm. Sentence complexity also.
First half was organized, but the second half is not.
Right, and that's a very good point, because that may be what happens, that they lack focus or they lack ability for attention. I'll take you all to this hyperlink and we'll look at this writing sample, and because where you see these little red marks at, we'll see, we'll get some feedback on that. One is a third grade writing sample, and so this is observations made about this student's writing. Now, do we have kids in middle school that write at the third grade level? Absolutely. Yeah. So let's take a look here. So he writes with a purpose. So that's one comment. So this one tells us a graphic organizer, like a hamburger, the paragraph, a graphic organizer to help him with a paragraph might help him how to plan out and be able to put a little more content in, right? Because he does miss some content. We're seeing that this student has problems with long vowel patterns, right? Because he's using the long vowel. He's using the silent E for that vowel sound for bear, B-A-R-E. So he's using that. So from this, we can gather that there is a deficit around vowel patterns. Then I may teach explicitly some spelling patterns or spelling rules. So I may have to go back and teach him the silent E again, and then have him practice writing words that have the silent E and practice words that do not have the silent E. So that's going to guide my thinking around what lessons I designed to help support that. So he knows his sight words. So that tells me that's another telling piece, is that, okay, if he knows his sight words, I don't need to be just teaching sight words, right? I may be teaching sight words for fluency, but if he knows those and I'm teaching, I don't need to be teaching those. I need to be moving on to vowel patterns or some other area where he has a deficit. Again, this is back to talking about punctuation. So we know it was around conventions. So here's a strategy. We have kids practice reading aloud to see if there's appropriate tone and voice and articulation. Now let's look at the last one here. This one is a very positive statement. Being able to stay on topic is not a deficit that he has. So sometimes when we don't really know that drilled down skill deficit, we might be working on topic and writing details to support that. So now we know, based on this writing sample, that that's not necessarily an area of deficit for this child, but then I need to go back and work on spelling or conventions. And this might be the most efficient way to move my student to more proficient writing. But this Reading Rockets has some more examples of that. And that's just good practice for you. You can go to Intervention Central and pull all kinds of 1-minute probes for students that you can do timed responses. And then there are also tools around progress monitoring but there's also ones that help support writing, and graphic organizers and all kinds of different things. Now, if you were working with students on spelling, and for instance, if we think about this through a virtual learning experience, what are some of those sources that we could have students practicing with spelling when we're not in that face-to-face, but that we're giving them some independent work that would give them some opportunities for practice and feedback? And then reading rockets. And looks like it's cut off my .org on there, but reading rockets, and there's just a ton of resources there on that reading rockets.